Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And a good piece by David Harsanyi over at The Federalist about the left's obsession with climate change hysteria. Jeff Merkley, Democrat Senator from Oregon, one of the co-sponsors of the GND with AOC, sent out a fundraising email warning Democrats that climate change was causing, quote, growing mega fires, extremely destructive hurricanes, and horrific flooding in which American lives are at stake.
Stop scaring people.
Since 1980, death caused by all natural disasters and heat and cold is somewhere under 0.5%. It's true that 2019 has seen a spike in tornadoes, but mostly because 2018 was the first year recorded without a single violent tornado in the United States.
Well, that's impressive.
Tornadoes killed 10 Americans in 2018, the fewest since we started keeping track of these things in 1875. And as Harsanyi writes, only 4 years after the nefarious combustion engine was invented. Oh, the detestable industrial age. After a few devastating hurricanes around a decade ago, we were similarly warned that it was a prelude to endless storms and ecological disaster. That was followed by 9 years without a single major hurricane in the United States. Or in other words, 6 fewer hurricanes than we experienced in 1908 alone. Here's the thing. Modern technology will continue to allow human beings to adapt to organic and anthropogenic changes in the environment. And human beings are not going to surrender the wealth and safety that technology has afforded and continues to afford them. In point of fact, Harsanyi points to a survey conducted by the Yale Program on Climate Change that finds even for the most leftist voters, climate change ranks third on the list of most important issues. Among all voters, it's 17th. And yet you have Democrat socialist candidates for president that are running almost exclusively on that because that's where the noise is. That's where the heat is. But heat and light are not the same thing. And it's interesting because this dovetails with a piece our friend of the show, Ted Van Dyke, writes in the Wall Street Journal. You know, he's an old Democrat warhorse, 40 years in the party. And he tried to convince us last time we had him on that the majority of the party is like Joe Biden, moderate. Well, first of all, Joe Biden's not a moderate. He's a nothing. He just plays to whatever the zeitgeist is. But Ted Van Dyke is a moderate, and he thinks the majority of the party is moderate. So listen to his prescription in the Journal, how Democrats can avoid losing. And it's interesting, frankly, that people like Ted Van Dyke see the Democrats as losing 2020 right now. Don't pursue impeachment. Abandon the Green New Deal. Moderate Medicare for all. Embrace immigration reform. Reject identity politics. Make tax policy fair. Stop promising free stuff. Respect the other side on abortion. So all the Democrats have to do, all they have to do in 2020 is the opposite of every single thing they're doing now in order to win. How likely do you think that is, Ted? Oh, goodness. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Steve Cortes, CNN political commentator, Trump Hispanic Advisory Council president. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Amy and Dan. Thanks for having me.
So Ted Van Dyke has a prescription for what Democrats should do, which is, I said, everything you're doing right now, stop and do 180 degrees the opposite.
Right.
And
right.
You had a piece in Real Clear Politics saying one of the other things you should stop doing, because this also is not going to work, is trying to tag President Trump as a racist and gather everybody around the solidarity and marginality campfire against the big, bad, racist president.
Right. And by the way, not only should they not do it because it won't work, but they also shouldn't do it because it's just plain wrong.
Well,
it
please.
is wrong. The Democratic Party right now is trying its best, and unfortunately successful to some degree, to gin up racial division in this country because they believe it will pay political dividends. And what I mean by that is they think that if they scare minorities and if they guilt and shame whites into believing that Donald Trump and his movement are an inherently racist movement, that will benefit them electorally. And so we see this by lots of hyperbolic coverage within the media. For example, there was a small gathering over Memorial Day weekend in Dayton, Ohio, of some racist reprobates, okay? It was a few hateful losers. Literally 9 people showed up to a Klan rally in Dayton, Ohio. However, Alyssa Milano tweeted about this. She tweeted, quote, "I don't even recognize my country anymore."
Oh my God, it's the same thing they've been doing.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, I lived in Detroit. They had a
online.
KKK rally. 9 guys showed up, but you had about 500 people protesting. It's the same thing.
Right, and
nothing
hundreds
new.
of cops who thankfully, kept the peace in Dayton, so nothing happened. But my point is this: look, of course, we live in a fallen world. There's always going to be hateful people. However, but the left is trying to convince us that we live in a world of 100 years ago, that we live in the Jim Crow South, or that we live in the Mississippi burning era. And I'm saying that is not remotely the reality of America today. If you were to gather all of the actual neo-Nazis and Klansmen in America together and round them up, you wouldn't fill up a high school gymnasium. Even more importantly, though, than those virulent haters, just look at our society more generally and our culture. Interracial relationships are totally unremarkable now. The Gallup poll last year, the most admired man and woman in America, both black, both named Obama. The number 2 most admired woman, Oprah Winfrey. This is not an inherently racist country. This is not to say racism is totally eradicated. Of course not anywhere. However, it is not a fundamentally racist society, and it's wrong for the left and for Democrats to try to create a narrative that it is only for their political benefit, because that itself then creates racial division and resentment. And my point in my article, too, that I wrote on Real Clear Politics is, thankfully, it won't work in 2020 because the American people see through this. They see how biased the media is, and they see their own lived reality, by the way, that if and I say this often on CNN, if President Trump's a racist, he's the worst racist in history, because all he's done is create opportunity and prosperity for minorities. And when we look at the other side, and I often cite this staggering statistic on Chicago, on our city. When we look at the other side, a city that the Democrats have had basically total control of the city of Chicago for almost a century, right now in the city of Chicago, young black men aged 20 to 24, according to the University of Illinois study, 47% of them are neither in school nor employed. So those are the results of the leftist policies that allegedly care for the little guy and care for the downtrodden and minorities. That's the reality on the ground, is that they're all lip service and not policy delivering, whereas on Donald Trump's side, we have actually the exact opposite of policies that are dynamic for small business and that are particularly benefiting all underdogs, no matter what your color is, but that certainly includes racial minorities.
Well, I think it's more than that, too. I think we need to jujitsu this a little bit more. And let's talk about racist policies. I mean, who is the movement supporting, say, segregated graduation ceremonies by race,
That's ridiculous.
segregated faculty meetings, segregated student assemblies, segregated campus life? Who wants to make everything defined by non-behavioral characteristics like race and gender? That's the that's the measurement by which we should advance one person or leave another person back. So, I mean, who is the racist obsessed? All of this racist talk is just projecting onto conservatives who the left truly is.
That's a great point, because let's face it, there is an entire industry of race hustling, which is really what you're talking about, and particularly within academia, right? I mean, it's just rampant within academia. People who literally make their livelihoods, and in some cases get quite wealthy. People like Al Sharpton, for instance, in media, but it's more prevalent even in academia, off of race hustling, and that's exactly what you're talking about. Who again, they need to create divisions, and in my mind, that's far more racist than anything that they can try to project onto what the right is doing. And I think that it's corrosive to our society. We're already a polarized country. I mean, regardless, right now, we don't agree fundamentally on a lot of things that we used to fundamentally agree on as a country. It's wrong for the Democratic Party, for crass political purposes, or in some cases for individual economic purposes, for their own prosperity, their own advancement. It's wrong to try to exacerbate and in some cases actually create racial division. And that's what the Democratic Party does. And I'm trying to call them out on. But here's the other thing, Dan, that I think is important. Too many Republicans, too many conservatives, we cower because we're so scared of being called racist that we won't take this issue on. And I'm saying we need to take it head on, both politically and also philosophically, for the sake of the country. And we need to say, not only are we not racist, You're the one who's actually acting in a prejudiced manner by only seeing people. The Democratic Party, let's face it, they are fixated on a person's skin and their private parts. I think that's really the reality. They don't see the soul, the mind. They don't see the whole person. They want us to focus on the externalities only, which is a very base way to approach people, and I would argue a very racist way, a prejudiced way to approach people.
All right, yesterday, about 1,000 illegals poured into El Paso, Texas. The president took to Twitter and warned of an imminent 5% tariff on Mexican imports to America. Do you think that he should be separating, the tariffs from border security? Aren't those two separate issues?
I don't actually, and I just posted a new piece this morning on Real Clear Politics about this to make Mexico a good neighbor again. Look, I think this is the leverage we have on Mexico, and I don't like tariffs. I view tariffs to me, to policy, to foreign policy, are somewhat. Well, the military action is to diplomacy. It's an unfortunate reality that has to be real. It has to have teeth, and at times you have to use it, but we'd rather not. But in this case, Mexico has refused to act like a good neighbor, and they have been very happy to make their temporary problem our permanent problem. And what I mean by that is these Central American migrants who are overwhelmingly economic migrants. They are not legitimate asylum seekers. Those countries are tough places for sure in Central America, but they're not places of political repression. Asylum is for people who are fleeing, who fear for their safety because of their beliefs or because of their identifying characteristics. That's just not the case with the vast majority of these folks. Because, by the way, if they believed that, they would just take asylum in Mexico rather than cross that enormous country to get to the United States. Now, I think Mexico is at best, tacitly allowing this. At worst, they're actually actively assisting it because, again, they want their problem to become our problem. To me, the best way, and it is severe and it carries risks, financial markets don't like it certainly, but to me, the best way to get their attention, because they've been unwilling to be a good partner and friend, is to say you can't have access to the American market. You can't have access to the crown jewel of global consumer markets, which is the United States. You can't have access to that and pretend to be a friend or partner unless you act like a friend and ally. And part of that is helping us in border control. So I think it's very smart of him. It's only 5% to start. It's not catastrophic, but it will ratchet higher if they don't start to comply. And to me, this is a smart strategy. It's similar to what he's doing with the Chinese. You want to be a trade partner with us? Anyone who wants to partner with the United States, you have to act like it. There has to be reciprocity. And in the case of Mexico, there is right now a flow of 100,000 plus a month is the clip of people coming here to abuse our asylum system. At that rate, we are soon going to have millions of impoverished, largely unskilled, totally unvetted people in our country. And what is that going to do for poor American citizens, for American citizens who live in tough circumstances and are striving for better lives here? How is that in any way fair to them, most of all? So I'm glad the president's taking a tough stance, and I hope that Mexico will comply.
Well, this is about as dumb an arms race as you can have, this economic arms race, because it's a contest to see who can impose the most damage on their own people. And the appetite that Chinese communists and Mexican Marxists have to impose damage on their own people is much bigger than Trump's appetite or the American people's appetite to endure that kind of damage. So, I completely disagree with these policies. And it's the one thing that has the potential to disrupt his reelection, in my mind.
I think, Dan, what you're not realizing, though, is that the Chinese Communist Party, how badly, and they're two different issues, though related, how badly the Chinese Communist Party needs the American consumer and needs him on a real-time basis.
Can they last? Can the Xi regime last another 14 months? I think it can.
Well, sure, I think it can. But the question is, how much pain internally too is China willing to take? Because the Chinese regime effectively has a bribe with its people, right? It has said you will tolerate repression in exchange for growth, but they have to deliver that growth, and they have to deliver it on a real-time basis. And they are facing a debt crunch right now. That puts them in a very perilous economic situation.
Right.
So I really believe this is an opportune time to press them.
Yeah, well, they can always go back to repression. That's what communists like. All right, we're going to leave it there. Steve Cortes, CNN political commentator. Catch his pieces, realclearpolitics.com. Steve, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.